So in today's web dev tip, we're going to get set up with a database on our local machine, and that will enable us to connect our API to it so that when we generate one of the short URLs like we did in the previous tutorial, we'll be able to save that and remember it so that when the consuming user uses the URL, we'll be able to redirect them to wherever we want. So there's different options for your database, obviously, for our project, but to keep things simple, because we can store pretty much what we consider JavaScript objects into it, I've chosen the Mongodb database system, and we can install it in a couple of different ways. So the first way is just to go to the website and download the necessary files and installers and install MongoDB directly like that. And whilst this is fine if you're just going to be working on one project, if you're going to be working on multiple projects, then you might want to separate all of the different databases into different platforms. So another option that we could do to install MongoDB is to use Docker. So if you're not familiar with Docker, we can use Docker to create containers of pieces of software or entire operating systems if we need to, and keep everything separate in terms of the software that we need for our application in one place. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about Docker and how it works in the tutorials that are coming up, but if you do want to use this approach, then feel free to head on over to the Docker website and install it for your platform. And I'm going to be using Docker just to quickly set us up with a MongoDB system, but once we've set that up, there will be very little difference between using a pure MongoDB installation or the Docker version. So once you've got Docker set up, in order to get a container with the MongoDB software running in it, we need to run a couple of command line commands. And if you head on over to this link in the Docker hub, you'll find some information about the Docker image that's officially provided by MongoDB. And to run an instance of Mongo, all we need to do really is just to run this command here. So we can just use this command, but before we do that, there is a few other options that you can provide as well. So you might want to protect your local container if it's going to be shared between other people, or if you're just going to have multiple users on the same machine. And you can do that by providing an initial username and password, which you can then use within your configuration within our app. So we'll probably do this just so that you can see how you can provide a username and password string to a Mongo connection when we actually connect up our API. So we can see we've got a very similar command, but we simply just provide a username and password here. So let's actually just copy this and then go over to our terminal. And if I paste that into here, we just need to make a few changes just to make sure that we've got the right information here. So this network I'm just going to remove because I just want to specify some ports for Mongo to run on. So we just use this to specify a bit of port mapping. So Mongo traditionally runs on the 27017 port, and that will be the port that's exposed on the container. But again, if we're going to have multiple containers, you can't use the same port for each container. So you could specify this as something different. So you could, for example, say this is 27018, and then if you want to set up another container, you can say 27019, etc., and use available ports that you have to run multiple instances of this Mongo container. So again, we can specify the name in here. So let's call it rickandroll, just so that it matches our project name. And then let's also specify some credentials here for our instance. So Mongo admin should be fine, but I'm just going to put a random password in here. Nothing too secure, but just something that secures that Mongo instance ever so slightly, just so that it can't be accessed openly. So let's just run that command now. When we run it, if you don't have the MongoDB package already available, what Docker will actually do is go out to the Docker hub and download all the necessary files, and it will download those and create the instance for you. It looks like I've already got them installed here, so we don't actually see that update. But now we have a Docker instance running with the MongoDB software. So to check that with Docker, you can say Docker and then space and PS to list all of the Docker containers that we've got. So if we hit enter, let me just make this slightly smaller for you so you can see all of that on one line. Run it again there for you. So hopefully you can see that this is the format that Docker PS gives you. So we've got an ID for the container. You can see we've just created that Mongo one there. And it tells you how long it's been running for. We can see the port mapping as well. So we can see that our local computers 27018 is mapped to the Docker images standard Docker port, and also we've got the name so we can identify it along here. So there you go, we've got Docker image setup running our MongoDB software. In the next tutorial, we'll just check that that's working by making a connection to it and see if we can run some simple queries against our MongoDB database. But that's it for this tutorial. Make sure you stay tuned for more web dev tips.